Mordhau is a game about the German school of swordsmanship, well, Mordhau, also known as Mordstrike or Mordschlag, which is literally German for demonetized stroke, which is pretty metal. This technique involves holding a sword inverted with both hands gripping the blade, hitting the opponent with the pommel or crossguard. Okay, now that we've read enough of the Wikipedia page on what Mordhau is in real life to make me feel like I have any idea what I'm talking about, let's talk about the actual game, which contains precisely 2 weapons which actually utilize this school of swordsmanship. That said, Mordhau is a game about chivalry. No, not that one. Mordhau is a game about medieval warfare. You go away. My favorite ways to describe Mordhau to people who haven't played it is by comparing it to Chivalry if they've played that, and if not, then Call of Duty. Except if you replace the guns with medieval weapons such as swords, axes, rocks, and turds, and instead of your progression being linked to how high level you are because of how long you've been playing the game, your level is relatively meaningless in Mordhau, as your progression is measured by how well you can read your opponent's actions, how well you can master the meta of mechanics the game features such as combo attacks, stamina drain, parrying, accelerating, dragging, angled strikes, alternate attacks, kicking, feinting, laughing, taunting, and how well you can dance around like a f***ing ballerina. There are 64 pieces of equipment, including the 18 one-handed weapons, 27 two-handed weapons, 2 weapons that can do a little bit of both, 8 ranged weapons, 5 shields, and 4 other. These weapons do different things, especially toward different levels of armor, of which there are 4 levels. None, light, medium, and heavy armor. The heavier the armor, the better it is to use blunt weapons, and the lighter the armor, the better it is to use sharper weapons. While Mordhau is actually a relatively small part of Mordhau, it highlights a feature that not enough games utilize nowadays, and that feature is alternate attack modes. A lot of alternate attack modes are shared between weapons, but they all affect different weapons differently. Some weapons have a default mode which has an extended range but slower attack, and an alternate mode which is shorter range but faster and stronger for stabbing. Some weapons allow you to throw them as their alternate mode. Some weapons allow you to wield them with one hand or 2 hands depending on your needs for speed and damage. Some weapons only have a ranged mode whether using primary mode or alternate mode. Some weapons have no alternate mode, and some weapons, by that I mean one, allows you to pull the freaking pommel off blasting it at the target of your choice. Oh god, I just hit your ankle. Alright, the clip I showed for that was slightly a lie. Throwing your pommel is only possible with a longsword, and doing so deals exactly only 1 damage. This is generally pretty useless. On a related note to this, the reason why I killed here is due to the fact that if someone is suffering from the effects of Monty Python, a swift toss of the pommel can end their suffering. Perks, well along with loadouts, are why I compare this game to Call of Duty in any capacity. Loadouts have a limited number of points used to allocate which weapons, armor, and perks you are able to use. You get a pool of 15 points that you can spend to your heart's content. For reference, the God-slaying Zweihander is 10 points, and the rapid-fire Rapier is 4 points. The points are based on potential power here. Perks also consume points, as much as 8 points for Peasant, which we'll come back to in a moment, and as little as 1 point for Fireproof. The usefulness of these perks varies quite widely, as you can imagine. Fireproof is extremely underrated in my opinion, as it gives you the ability to freely intimidate your enemies as you waltz through their petty weak firebombs. Normally you'll lose consciousness for the last time in fire after about 4 seconds, but with Fireproof that time is stretched to 20 seconds. That said, the more powerful perks are at the higher end, such as Dodge at 4 points, which allows you to escape the grasp of a maul with a fleeting breath, and Bloodlust at 5 points, allowing you to consume the souls of your inferior opponents. Noticeably, the most expensive perk, that is Peasant, at 8 points is definitely not high on the usefulness scale. This is a perk used either for goofing around, or if you are so good at the game that the only enjoyment you get is by stripping away any power you might have and destroying your enemies with high stakes as such. Peasant, as high a point cost as it is, only restricts you from using any armor or any worthwhile weapons. You are only able to use the equipment and weapons that a Peasant would. This includes things like loots, pitchforks, pickaxes, and other various Minecraft tools. Circling back around to the pommel, Flesh Wound allows you to stay alive for 5 seconds after reaching 0 health. You are not guaranteed to retain all your limbs in this state, and if you lose your head, you die anyway. Regardless of where it hits, the pommel from a longsword will be a swift end to your bullshit if you use this perk. In Mordhau, there's 4 different game modes currently available. Frontline, which is where you attempt to coerce not only yourself, but also up to 23 other people who have zero understanding of what is going on into winning a game on poorly developed maps. While the visuals of the map are great, the layouts are the real problem, in that if a team is slightly ahead of the other team, it becomes exponentially embarrassing if you somehow manage to lose not only that advantage, but also the match, because the advantages are that terribly strong. There's also Fortnite mode, which I haven't been good enough to effectively participate in yet, that is exactly what it sounds like in the same maps. The player limit is only 64 though, unlike most games, capping you at 100. If you do somehow manage to get past the waiting simulator, you can likely expect that due to the low count of players actually playing this game mode, that 2 or more players will be teamed up despite it being free-for-all. Additionally, there's Horde Mode, which is essentially Germano anti-monetization zombies from that Call of Duty game 11 years ago, but replaced the zombies with anything from lowly peasants to monstrous giants to lazily shrunken people models that wear red and attempt to douse you in enough flammable fluids in hopes that you too will join them in their red antics. Lastly, there's unranked duels, which more or less is elimination deathmatch for 1v1, where you have 5 rounds to win. If none of these official game modes work for you, there's always the server browser, which has various modifications to each of these game modes hosted by individuals instead of being hosted by Tritonian, the developers. Most of your time in the game will likely be spent in Frontlines, modded Horde Mode servers with 3 times damage, or free-for-all duel servers where the goal is to find someone who agrees with you that one of you needs to be demonetized and you proceed to attempt to off each other. Whichever of these floats your goat the best. Typically the gameplay is different, but what happens in them is about the same. Earlier on in your MORDHAU career, you will spend a lot of time being demonetized. And by a lot of time, I do not mean a short amount of time, I mean a lot of time. During that time, and even after you slightly understand the mechanics of the game and can beat someone sometimes, your time will consist of the following. When you're not offing your own teammates, then promptly being called racial slurs for it, getting game ended by your teammates, then promptly being called racial slurs for it, beating enemies, then promptly being called racial slurs for it, or being beaten by enemies, and promptly being called racial slurs for it, you'll probably be spending most of your time either stumbling into one of the many bugs that this game has, or enjoying the game deliberately so long as you ignore the chat and have thick enough skin to withstand the treacherous wasteland that is this game's community. A large part of the game's chat functionality is used for people to either tear each other down due to having a self-value that is low enough to constitute such unneeded hatred, or asking people kindly and gently to end their own existence in their real life based off of actions they did in a single game. Similar to a lot of high-profile competitive games, and surprisingly enough a lot of the internet, this game is filled with rampant toxicity. That has dragged public perception of this game down, as understandably not everyone can handle being called words that start with the letter N because they chose the wrong weapon to use in a game they just bought. It wouldn't be as bad if there were even a slight amount of moderation to this game, but clearly Tritonian doesn't care even in the slightest. There's a neat little vote kick feature that can be used to remove someone from a match if enough people dislike them, but the only ways to trigger this are if you click their name in chat to do so, or if they're griefing with gameplay instead and refusing to chat, you open the freaking developer console to type vote kick and then their name. There's a way to circumvent the ability to be vote kicked by most people by just putting characters in your name that most people can't type on their keyboards. Surely there must be a way to counteract that though, right? Yes, there is. Further in the developer console, you can type player list and it will list off each player alongside their Steam ID and some arbitrary ID for them in the current match. After figuring out the Steam ID or match ID for the person you wish to remove, you can type vote kick and then that ID. It's as if the developers want harassing behavior to go unchecked. Furthering this issue, if a player is kicked by a vote, they're banned from that match for all of 5 minutes. That'll show them. After this time, they're free to rejoin and continue their poor behavior. You can mute people if you want, but that doesn't stop them from doing what they're doing to other people. Additionally, you can motivationally mute them, which turns all their messages into compliments. Outside of this, there's no way for users to be reported for their behavior unless someone goes out of their way to report them through Steam, at which point likely nothing will happen. There's more to the game than all of this, but this seemed like the most important information in my eyes. There's horses, obligatory Team Fortress 2 engineers, ballistas, both small and large, and a lot of nuance to each of the weapons which makes the game all the better. But I limited the video to things that seemed most interesting. All in all, the game is pretty great in my opinion, assuming you can come to it desensitized to the possibility of humanity barreling towards the trash can. I talked about a few things, namely alternate attack modes, general gameplay, perks, and the community. So I guess this is the part of the video where I rate the game. For sound design, I'd say it passes a 7 for me. It's not the pinnacle of game sounds, but you'll know a good meaty crunch from a solid slice. There's enough audio information present that you can control your position effectively, and I can really appreciate that. As for graphics, it gets an 8. The maps are gorgeous, player and NPC models look realistically gritty, and weapon and armor models look extremely nice. Gameplay is a bit of a mixed one, as it has to be 7. Were you to just look at the weapon play by itself, it would easily be a 9. It's definitely one of the best games I've played in a while in this respect. It loses a point, however, for the fact that its maps, while gorgeous, are horridly unbalanced in design. In Frontlines, by the time a match is in full swing, it becomes exponentially embarrassing for the winning team to not only lose that advantage, but also the match. Usually the best way to enjoy the game is to not play Frontlines or make sure winning is not a requirement for you to enjoy. It also loses another point simply because of how much the game is biased against ranged weapon users. When you are using anything that is not a melee weapon, such as bows and toolboxes, and you get hit by a melee weapon, the best you can do is exclaim, "Oops," while you helplessly drop that weapon. Player customization is pretty great as well. It's pretty much a stock Call of Duty styled loadout system, but the selections are very uniquely defined away from each other, such that there's generally no overlap in responsibilities. I didn't go over this, but there's also a player model customization, which is great aside from the fact that you can't be not white and you can't be female. Mechanically, I can imagine why they wouldn't want to do a female model unless it had the same size hitbox as the male model due to balancing reasons, but I don't know. Still feels a little restrictive, especially in modern times. Not being able to play not white characters seems like a pretty good segue into the community. Given the game is a multiplayer only one unless you play local matches against exclusively AI, I feel a need to rate this game's community, for which it rightfully gets a 3. On the one hand, it's so unbelievably bad and vile, but on the other hand, it's so uncensored, which makes people, even the not so bad people, feel more free, which is usually what leads to the most unique and memorable experiences you see in some of these types of games, similar to World of Warcraft, early Overwatch, Team Fortress 2, or pretty much any game on 2007-ish Xbox Live. Overall, that puts my points at 25 of 40, which would be a 6 of 10. I think that feels like it's in about the right territory. It's a great game held back by a couple of problems that are rather monolithic in size. As said, I'd recommend it, but with the caveat of needing to be able to withstand anonymous hatred. Anyway, if you come to a fairly valid conclusion that my opinions are wrong, which they likely are, feel free to make your own video calling me out, or leave a comment letting me know how terrible of a person I am. If you like my video, there's a button to let me know you did, and a form for a comment you can fill out below if you disliked it, or even a button for disliking if that suits your fancy. If you really liked it, feel free to get subscribed, and after you do, hit that bell to stay notified of when I make another video in the next 2 to 30 weeks. Not entirely sure what direction I'll go after this video. It'll really depend on how you all like this. This is very different from anything else on my channel. I can't guarantee what kind of content it will be, but if you like the personality, that'll probably stay sort of consistent, I guess. Okay, anyway, this has been your Wave Lord. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.